Jeff's gone away to mid-conference doing the pastor thing, which I don't even know what that is. It's supposed to be secret. So if you want to ask him, I guess. But anyway, he'll be back next week. You know, this year we have a theme of Just to Jesus. Last year we did the Hope theme. This year we're doing Just to Jesus. We're going to spend the whole year just looking at all the things about Jesus. Because some of us, I know myself, I probably have misconceptions about who he is, and so join us throughout the rest of the year as we look at just Jesus and find out what the scriptures say about him, and maybe I'm hoping to get rid of that snake skin that I have that's some misconceptions that I have about Jesus. But one of the things that we're going to do this morning is talk about the Financial Peace University. I know you've heard of that because we've had that class here about 3 years ago, but we're going to be talking about some financial things. But let me tell you about our journey. Laurel and I, as far as being involved in churches, many years ago, we started doing some of the financial classes, which started with Larry Burkett, and then it went to Crown. Have any of you ever heard of the Crown Ministries and done that before? Okay, so I can remember that that's a class that has several weeks that are involved, I think 13 or more. And I remember the first time that we led that and facilitated the class. We're about 4 weeks into it, and a young man comes up and says, "We are in week 4, and we haven't even started talking about money yet. All you're doing is talking about God and our relationship to God. And when are we going to start talking about money?" And I said, well, you have to have a right relationship with God before we start to talk about money, and that's why we spent so much time with that. And so he finally got it after a while when we got to understand that when it comes to money, it's not just about the money. That's a physical thing, but it's about a relationship. It was through the Crown Ministry that we learned that there's over 2,200 verses in the Bible about money. It's the most written about thing in the Bible, other than mentioning God, but it's the subject matter. There's nothing more than that. So I think it's very interesting. It's one of those things that we spend time about, but we don't understand its power. We just sort of, okay, we've got money, we're in a society now, but we don't really give it the thoughts that we should. And so we are now doing Financial Peace University, which if you hear me say FPU, that's what it stands for. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that this morning. We have some people that are going to do some testimonies because we have a new class that's coming up, and so that's what today is about. But I wanted to refer to the scripture that we read this morning in Psalms 33. If you allow me, I'm going to read from the New Living Translation, and it goes like this. It says, "Don't count on your war horses to give you victory, because of all of its strength, it cannot save you." So I want to stop right there for a second, because war horses, do we really worry about that anymore? Maybe horsepower or something, I don't know, but not war horses. And I know that word and that whole concept there is talking about what we trust and rely upon for a victory. And if you think about it nowadays, we have things that we've substituted for that word. You could go back and read that scripture and say, "Don't count on your money to give you victory, for in all of its strength it cannot save you." And we could substitute a lot of things in there. Our pension, or sometimes we think that tithing is going to save us and give us victory. Sometimes we think our health. Hey, I'm in good health. Doing good. Everything is wonderful. Well, that health has to come from somewhere and for a purpose. It's not something that gives you victory. We think of our job, or possibly that we are smart and intelligent, and in my case, not so good looking. And anyway, or it's who you know. Maybe your power and your victory comes from who you know. I'm going to get things and I'm going to win in life because it's who I know. And I'm talking about people, not necessarily the Lord. Or maybe it's our ministry. My ministry is going to save me because I'm involved in this wonderful ministry, and it's obviously the right ministry, and it's blessed by Jesus. Well, the ministries are alive to glorify Jesus, not to make it so that your strength and your salvation comes from the ministry. It just comes from Christ through the ministry. So the rest of the scripture here talks about this is how it says it. "But the Lord watches over those who fear him, those who rely on his unfailing love. He rescues them from death and keeps them alive in times of famine. We put our hope in the Lord. He is our help and our shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name. I love this last verse here, verse 22. Let your unfailing love surround us, Lord, for our hope is in you alone. Not in the war horses, not in those things that we listed that could be substituted, but it's in you alone. Our hope comes from you. Now I know that sometimes when we start talking about money, possessions get involved, things that we accumulate. And I've always wondered about why sometimes it's hard to give away those things that we have as our possessions. But you know what? They've begun to possess us if you really think about it. We cling to them often out of desire because we think that what they're going to do is give us that strength and that security and the shield and happiness and comfort and things like that. But I know that if we sat down, we went to somewhere and sat down and we had a conversation, and I really talked to you about, are those things going to save you? Are they that important? Do they bring you happiness? Most of you would say that they do not. You know in your heart of hearts and your soul that they do not, but yet we live otherwise. And so I just find that to be very interesting. Now, I'm not saying it because I've got that down. No, I've got a problem with that too. It's a challenge. I recognize it. I have those things. But it's very important that we realize where our happiness comes from, and because those things that we have become idols to us also. So, I mean, remember a couple weeks ago we had that lotto that was $1.5 billion or something like that? You know, I mean, we wonder how many of us bought the ticket, and how many of us even prayed that it would be good for us to have that because we're good people and we do good things with it. Okay, all right. But you know what I was thinking about? We were talking about this in the men's group tonight, and I think it's apropos for today. I wonder how many times I have prayed to have $1.5 billion units of love in my life that I can share with others. How many times have I prayed for 1.5 billion units of faith that I can believe in Jesus? You know what's interesting about the faith thing? The scripture says all you need is a mustard seed, not 1.5 billion units of it. Just a mustard seed. And what can you do? Melt. Oh, isn't God? Yeah, he flips things around sometimes. So we could pray about, I mean, I started to say, I wish that I had wealth in all these different areas. Giving and joy. You know, I want that much joy. I don't want to, I'd rather have 1.5 billion units of joy than the dollars. Seriously. I mean, just think about that life. It would be wonderful. Solomon was even asked, what do you want? When he was asked, you know, God said, what do you want? He said wisdom. He didn't ask for the material things, but what I find to be interesting is that he got the material things because of the wisdom. Now, I'm not going to say that that always happens, but he had his heart that he wanted to do the spiritual things. But I also reminded of the scripture that says, you know, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and what will happen? It'll be added to you. So there's the possibilities, and again, not saying that that's what God has blessings for you that way, but I know that if you put God first, that there will be blessings that he means for you and intended for you that way. And so I know that one of the things that financial peace talks about is debt. And nobody likes to talk about that word. That's almost a four-letter word. Okay. But I know that one of the things that really concerns some of the leaders in the church is about how grounded we are in the Word. Because when you're not grounded in the Word, it's easy to be deceived. Because the Word keeps you out of trouble. And so one of the things is that's what we're talking about is what is God saying about, we're talking about money this morning. So finances and money, personal. We're not talking about national debt. We're not talking about church debt and things like that, which we should be. But, okay, we're not going to do that this morning. That would get everybody in trouble. But we're talking about debt. And how do you feel about that? Yeah. Because Proverbs 22:7 says this, just as the rich rule the poor, the borrower is the slave to the lender. Okay? Haven't we been, I can tell you, in the 1960s, a lot of advertising started, a lot of marketing started that never happened before. Because in the 30s, 40s, and all before, I know people that if they had any debt at all, they would just do everything they could to get rid of it. It just wasn't common. But starting in the 60s, there was advertisements. And for those of you that are younger, that haven't been there in the 60s, we know that that's when the advertising started as far as credit cards. You'd think that they've been around for a long time, but that's when the marketing started. And so we have been heavily hit, where I would be willing to bet you that many of us think that it's just okay to have debt, and because we've been sold it. And so here it's telling us, though, that we've become slaves if we have it. And God, I know, is a jealous God, and He wants to have Him to be our master, and that we are His slave in that circumstance, and He's a loving Father, so not the debt. So, and I know in Dave Ramsey's book, he talks about his grandfather, who they lived in Indiana, and they wanted to move west to take advantage of all the things that were happening in the West in the 30s. But yet, he felt so bad because they had debt on their farm, and he said he read his grandfather's journal entries, and he said it was like reading about the fact that he thought that his grandfather had cancer, or that had a sin that could not be forgiven by God. I mean, he talked about debt that bad. And I wonder if that's still the same thought about debt these days. And to come to find out that all that the grandfather owed on the farm was $5. Not $500,000 or not $50, but just $5. And he wrote that in his journal just because he owed that little, and then they took care of it. So I find that to be very interesting about where we are in thinking about debt. Now let me read to you Proverbs 6, 1 through 5, and it says this. My child, if you have put up security for a friend's debt or agreed to guarantee the debt of a stranger, if you have trapped yourself by this agreement, very interesting, trapped yourself, and you are caught by what you said, follow my advice and save yourself. So here you trap yourself and save yourself. You put yourself in a place of your friend's mercy. So now swallow your pride and go and beg to have your name erased from the debt. And I like these last two verses. It says, don't put it off, do it now. Don't put it off, do it now. Don't rest until you do. Verse 6 says, save yourself like the gazelle escaping from the hunter, like a bird fleeing from the net. Now, what I think is very interesting, Dave Ramsey has a very good analogy about the gazelle, but I could imagine that the gazelles were, when they know that they're out there, they're just sitting there and going, and they're chewing away and everything and looking. Well, Henry, what do you think that is over there? That's a hunter? Okay, what do you think about a hunter? I wouldn't worry about the hunter until they shoot a shot. Let's not get up and run. Let's not be concerned about and you know what? The gazelles are not like that. They're almost like chipmunks. When they're sitting there eating, they're like... And then when... Hunter! Run! That's what this says here. It says, like the gazelle escaping the hunter. You think that the gazelle mosies? Hunter. Oh, hunter. No. There's a hunter coming after them, especially if it's a lion or something else. They are running pretty fast. And I think that it's interesting it talks about debt that way, that when we see that when there is debt, that we run away from it. You know, another thing that I find to be interesting is, my wife will open up the ads or something like that and go, ooh, they're having a shoe sale. I called up all my friends, Bev and Gail, and let's go shoe sale. She sell at DSW. Oh, look, they've got the kind I want. And I'm like, you got 200 shoes, but I don't have that one, and plus I have 4 other colors, but not that color right there. So I need that color. And last week I saw somebody wearing the same shoes that I was wearing, so I gotta get another pair. Now guys, you're laughing at that, but you're just as bad. Let the Bass Pro Shop thing come in there, and you're looking at it. I gotta have that bass boat. I catch the biggest bass if I get that little giggly bobber that'll catch with it. Oh, come on. I need to have that bass boat. Or, for those of you that don't fish though, there are many of you that play golf and you gotta have the biggest, latest, greatest. They're now making the heads on those things this crazy. Right down the middle of the fairway, I'll hit it if I had the latest and greatest. You know? So we all have things like that we hold near and dear. As a matter of fact, I have an aunt who has 600 dolls. She collects dolls. Okay? Her nickname is Dolly, of course, isn't it? But you know what's weird? Walking into her house and seeing 600 pairs of eyes looking at you. That's 100. I mean, that's a 1,200 eyeballs just staring at you. So you got one that the head's always falling off. And she goes, that's been in our family since 1879. That's the oldest one. Oh, that's an antique, isn't it? I said, wow. I said, look at all those creepy eyes. No wonder that one's always knocked off. Somebody's probably punching it out. It started creeping them out. But anyway, isn't that how some of the things that we get, we collect, aren't they? They get to be creepy like that because we go overboard because we think that those things, those war horses, whatever they are, they're going to save us. But that's not true. So what I wanted to do is, at this point, was to bring up a couple of, I had some people that were going to do testimonies.